What is vermiculite? I'm Justin with Veteran Compost. Let's talk about a great soil ingredient, and that is vermiculite. So you may or may not be familiar with it. Vermiculite is essentially a very lightweight stone. It reminds me of growing up as a kid of Formica. You know, kind of has that shiny kind of outside to it. It's mined in a couple different parts of the world. And then when you put it in an oven, if you're a vermiculite processor, they heat it up really hot and it kind of pops like popcorn. And so you end up with this very lightweight, kind of flaky material. We use vermiculite, or it can be used, I should say, in gardening to help kind of lightweight the soil, kind of loosen up the soil, create tilth or porosity. Vermiculite's also pH neutral, so you can add it without affecting the pH of your soil or your mixtures. And it also has a good ability to retain moisture and some nutrients. So it kind of acts a little bit like a sponge. And so if you were to add that to a potting mix, or you're making your own, it does help with water retention, which is especially helpful when you have plants that need nutrients, that need moisture to continue to grow. So it often gets confused with perlite. Perlite is the little tiny white balls you may see in a lot of the potting mixes that are out there. Perlite does a very similar thing. It is a rock that also puffs up when heated, but perlite does not hold water as much as vermiculite does. So, you know, what we really like it is we like it mixed in with soil or of existing plants, or if we're creating a mixture and we want to kind of lighten up the mix, we want to not affect the pH, and we want to have something that's going to help us retain moisture and nutrients, and that is what vermiculite's good for. One thing to keep in mind with vermiculite is there are different grades of it, and that has to do with the size of the particles. This is an extremely coarse grade of vermiculite. There are fine grades that almost look like kind of dust or powder. So often at the big box stores, pay attention to what the bag says. You may buy it thinking you're getting this, and you get powder, or vice versa. The finer grade is really good if you're doing a seed starting tray, or you're doing microgreens where you don't want large particles. A larger particle like this is great for if we're doing a raised bed mix, we're doing container mixes, things like that, where we want bigger, chunkier pieces. So just keep in mind the different grades of vermiculite when you buy it. The grade has to do with the size of the particle of what you're buying. So our history with vermiculite is kind of interesting. This is a material we were using heavily for probably about 10 years, making square foot garden mix. So anyone that has Mel's book is looking to make Mel's mix, you're probably very familiar with the request for vermiculite. Over the years though, we've started to kind of reevaluate our usage of vermiculite. Number one, the cost. The cost grew dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years because of the pandemic and some changes in the vermiculite industry. There's essentially a monopoly, an oligopoly of vermiculite mines and producers. So they've been able to apparently control the supply, and we've seen prices go up dramatically. It's also from very far away in the world, so shipping to get it from the mines here to the States and then have it puffed up in the natural gas fired ovens, all of that meant more cost, and then it also meant a pretty heavy carbon impact. And so we've looked at this again and thought about what could we do to be more sustainable. If our goal is to grow things, it kind of seems anti that goal to have mixtures that have ingredients that are not good for the planet. And so we have started to replace this with rice hulls. And rice hulls are something we'll cover in another video to talk about what rice hulls are and why we like them. And so in a lot of our mixtures now, you'll see rice hulls as the ingredient we're using in place of vermiculite. We do still have vermiculite in some of our mixtures, or our organic seed starter, and a couple other things. But we've started to move away from that towards rice hulls. Rice hulls are made in America, they're sustainable, they're less of a carbon impact, and they're also more cost effective per unit than the ever rising price of vermiculite. How would you use vermiculite for gardening, for growing? What we like to do is we like to mix it in with compost. Oftentimes we'll also add peat moss to create a growing media that has really good characteristics. So if we were to make a raised bed mix, like a Mel's mix, a square foot garden mix, we would add roughly 40% compost and then about split the remainder between vermiculite and peat moss. Peat moss is great for bringing down the pH, and like I said, the vermiculite is really good for holding water, holding nutrients, and also fluffing things up, because it's a large, lightweight particle. So it helps to create tilth, which plants love, because plant roots can explore the space a lot easier. They can get access to oxygen and water and the things they need within the soil. And so we like to use vermiculite kind of as a lightweight aggregate to mix into these soils. So in this example, if you were just doing repotting a plant or dealing with a house plant, you could take some compost, mix it with say 20% vermiculite, and have a really good mixture for house plants, for repotting plants, things like that. So if I was to use vermiculite for a raised bed, for repotting a plant, I would use a larger particle, anywhere from 20 to say 30% of the mixture. I would make that vermiculite and off it goes. If you're doing a seed starter mixture or something like that, you could probably get away with 10, 20, 30% vermiculite. It's not going to hurt anything. I would just use a smaller, finer particle so that in the tray it's less lumpy. It has a more uniform texture. So I would just go with a finer grade if I was going to do something that required that, like a microgreen, like a seed starter and things like that. So that's how we would use vermiculite in a mixture. Like I said, it has some concerns with its carbon impact and its rising price, and there are alternatives. Check out our video about rice hulls. But if you have it available, it's a great thing to use in your mixtures, in your garden, in your raised beds. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. We'll help you out. I'm Justin with Veteran Compost. Thanks, and happy growing.